We'll start recording the meeting now. Okay, so as it said on the agenda, and of course, this is a Brown Act compliant meeting, so we want to check in with the Butte Advisory Board members as well as member of the public to ask you if you have any comments for items that are not on the agenda this evening, but that are relevant to the Butte Subbasin Advisory Board's work. Please do go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to make any comments. Okay, I'm not seeing any. And so I think I'll go ahead and just quickly turn it over to you. Go ahead and turn it over to you, Byron, and you can share your screen to give an overview of the groundwater sustainability plan process timeline. Byron with David's Engineering.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Tanya. Please bear with me while I figure out how to share that particular screen. There. Are you guys able to see it?
Yep.
Great. Yeah. So I just have a couple of slides here to share, but hopefully to provide an overview of the process as we foresee it, and kind of the roadmap for developing and adopting and ultimately submitting the groundwater sustainability plan for the Butte Subbasin. So from kind of a big picture perspective, I guess where I like to start is that the GSP is due by January 31st of 2022 for submittal to the Department of Water Resources. And in order to meet that deadline, we anticipate adoption by each of the 11 GSAs, I believe that's the correct number, in the Butte Subbasin in late 2021. And that will be preceded by a public review process locally, where we would release the plan in August or thereabouts, receive those comments and incorporate them into the GSP to allow time for the respective boards of each GSA to then adopt the plan and accomplish that submittal to the Department of Water Resources. Where we're at in the process right now is, we've really got kind of a leg up, and that the basin setting work is largely complete. So we've developed documents that have been distributed and we've received valuable comments on, covering the hydrogeologic conceptual model, the groundwater conditions, and the water budgets. And so we're moving forward in terms of developing general information that's required to be included as part of the GSP, describing the plan area and the administrative information. Also moving forward with defining a representative monitoring network, which will, I think, largely be the existing monitoring network in the Butte Subbasin that we've relied on in the past to evaluate groundwater conditions. And also moving forward with what are called the minimum thresholds and the measurable objectives. We can talk about that in a bit more detail, but these are the quantitative indicators that will be defined for each monitoring site to evaluate whether sustainable conditions exist or whether there are undesirable results that are occurring. And along with that, we're also moving forward with identifying projects and management actions, and moving forward with some initial screening to help integrate those into the plan. Another process that is launching is the development of annual reports. The county has a long history of annually evaluating conditions in the basin, and so we'll be working to basically adapt and enhance that effort to meet the requirements of SGMA. Maybe a more detailed look at the primary components of the GSP that are being developed here in the leftmost column, and the phase or phases with which completion of those sections will be accomplished. And so, for example, the GSP general information, the Sustainable Management Criteria, or SMC, monitoring network, projects and management actions, or PMAs, interbasin coordination, which is something we'll also hit on later this evening, and then the ultimate preparation of the document itself and its adoption. And also to mention the annual reports, as I just described, as well as ongoing outreach activities. I won't kind of split these out in detail, but hopefully this helps provide some overview and some understanding of the process here moving forward. So short and sweet, but I certainly look forward to any discussion or answering any questions.
Yeah, so go ahead and raise your hand, please, if you have any questions about the GSP timeline. We just really wanted to make sure that we gave this overview so you could see where we are in the process and where we're going. Any questions from Butte Advisory Board members first about the GSP timeline, and then I'll turn to the public and see if you have any questions for Byron. FAB members? And how about any members of the public, questions about our timeline, where we are and where we're going? And then, of course, we also include a schedule that accompanies the agenda. We leave the entire schedule so you can see where we've been as well as where we're going. So hopefully that is also a helpful tool. Byron, anything else before closing on this piece?
I guess I just wanted to enforce or reinforce the importance of your input as stakeholders as part of this process. You know, as technical consultants, we can certainly help hopefully, you know, understand the basin, understand what the conditions have been in the past and what they might be in the future. But it's just paramount that we have input on things like sustainable management criteria and projects and management actions moving forward that, you know, reflect your views and values in terms of defining what is sustainable and, you know, what can be done either to maintain or achieve sustainability. You know, my sense based on the basin setting work is that the basin is in very good in a very good state. It's healthy, but you know, we want to be sure that that's the case moving forward as well.
Thank you, Byron. Very much appreciate that. And definitely I would echo what you've said there about the importance of input. Okay, well, you can go ahead and stop screen sharing if you wouldn't mind, Byron. And then Christina will be laying some foundation for us this evening for a preliminary discussion of sustainable management criteria. So I'll just turn it over to you, Christina.
Okay, thank you. Let me get this going here. Do I need to switch it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right, good evening. I'm Christina Buck with Butte County, and I'm gonna just do kind of the pregame here on describing the concepts really and the terminology that is involved in this section of the plan, the sustainable management criteria section. And it's pretty important. This is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of how we describe what sustainability is and how we're going to monitor and compare. So as with all things Sigma, it comes with its own slew of language and terminology. So in the past, I've presented and given some overview of basin setting, and we've talked about, you know, the draft work that is in this section of the plan. And today, and so I just wanted to review, as Byron just said, this is a figure out of the basin setting that has snapshots of groundwater conditions in wells throughout the subbasin. The map shows in blue areas of the subbasin that are groundwater dependent. I'm sorry, that are surface water supplied, surface water. green, dark green is groundwater supply for irrigation, and then this light green is are areas that receive a mix of the two supplies at different times. So you can see that we have a subbasin, as you all know, that's very reliant on reliable surface water supplies, and as a result, there are generally, and zooming in on some of these graphs, generally stable groundwater conditions and shallow groundwater conditions as well. So it's within that context, really, that we move from the basin setting piece of the plan into the sustainable management criteria section. And this has this terminology that I will describe. Before I get there, I just want to point out that the Department of Water Resources has this document on best management practices for this section of the plan, and the figures and information for this presentation, as well as the examples, come out of this document. So this section includes these four main components: sustainability goal, which is a qualitative description, kind of statement of sustainability, and then these three quantitative components: undesirable results, minimum thresholds, and measurable objectives. And so I'll walk through and describe each of these, but together, this is really what defines what sustainability is and looks like in the subbasin. So I think when Sigma was passed in 2014, it really, the first question often that I think people asked was, but what does that mean for things to be sustainable? What does sustainable management look like, or groundwater, sustainable groundwater conditions? What does that mean? And so this really is a section of the plan where that is defined, and it's locally defined. Local GSAs get to define what conditions in the basin are significant and unreasonable, and that is what defines the absence of significant unreasonable conditions is really what defines what sustainability is. So I'll get more into what that means. So groundwater is complicated. It has a number of different aspects, right? Both in terms of water quantity, there's issues related to that, protecting the resource, as well as water quality, and then impacts. And so the law outlines these 6 sustainability indicators, things that we have to keep an eye on. And if we're, kind of covering conditions in all 6 of these areas, then that covers groundwater sustainability. So we've got lowering groundwater levels, reduction of storage, seawater intrusion, and you see I have an X over that because of the distance from the Pacific Ocean, and seawater as a potential contaminant, it's not relevant to the basin. So throughout the presentation, we'll skip over that one. Water quality degradation, land subsidence, and depletion of interconnected streams. So really significant and unreasonable needs to be defined for each one of these sustainability indicators. And as an example, and this comes out of that BMP document, really, you could say, kind of as a statement, significant and unreasonable conditions would occur if basin-wide there's a loss of domestic well pumping capacity due to lowering of groundwater levels, right? That could be a statement of significant and unreasonable conditions, or related to land subsidence, localized inelastic land subsidence near critical infrastructure, such as a canal. That would be a significant and unreasonable condition that the basin wants to avoid through groundwater management. So those are just some examples. So this really hinges on an ability to measure what the conditions in the subbasin are, right? So this is where representative monitoring comes into play. We have to have wells and gauges or land subsidence measurements, right, to be able to track whether what the conditions are and how they compare to what has been defined and specified as a significant and reasonable condition. So you'll see that as well. So then that brings us to minimum threshold. So essentially the minimum threshold is our need to quantify what these conditions are that would be significant and reasonable. This is the standard by which beyond, if you're below this set standard of a minimum threshold, then significant unreasonable conditions are occurring. And when that standard is exceeded, and a combination of those things, we'll get to this, then that could result in an undesirable result. Okay, so each of the minimum thresholds need to describe a number of things. One, a justification for the minimum threshold has to be supported by information from the basin setting, data, or modeling, right? So what's behind? How did you decide where to put this line on the graph? It's got to be based on data or modeling or describing where that came from, what the justification for it is. Secondly, you have to describe the relationship between minimum thresholds for each of these sustainability indicators. So how do your minimum thresholds relate for groundwater levels? How does that relate to, say, land subsidence minimum threshold? So there has to be some acknowledgement of interplay between these different categories. Third, how do minimum thresholds, how have they been set to avoid interfering with another basin's ability to achieve sustainability goals? So this is where there's this hook for acknowledging that one subbasin may affect another, and minimum thresholds have to acknowledge that as well. Another point here, how does minimum threshold affect interests of beneficial uses or users of groundwater? And then how do they relate to state and federal local standards that already exist? So kind of tying SGMA into other existing policy and standards. And how does each minimum threshold, how will it be quantitatively measured? Okay, so kind of a lot of pieces to the minimum threshold, but it really ultimately is this standard that observed conditions are compared to. So this is a graph that just shows that. As an example, you'd have this monitoring, representative monitoring well that has historically observed groundwater levels. This minimum threshold is set to protect whatever the community is kind of set as the threshold for protecting beneficial uses and uses of groundwater. And then you're comparing what your observed conditions are relative to that minimum threshold. So I skipped over this. So each of these sustainability indicators, essentially, what are we going to measure to be able to compare to this set standard, right? So for lowering groundwater levels, we're looking at measuring groundwater elevations in monitoring wells. For reduction of groundwater storage, you're looking at estimating total volume and changes in volume, potentially. For degraded quality, there's a couple different things that you could look at, either migration of plumes, number of supply wells that are being impacted by a potential contaminant, volume of water contaminated, or location of isocontours. Again, this is really going to hinge on existing programs that are already tracking water quality issues in most cases. Land subsidence, here we can measure the rate or the extent of land subsidence in the subbasin. And then finally, surface water depletion. That's really, we can measure either the volume of surface water depletion or the rate of surface water depletion. So again, it's really about measuring conditions based on these potential metrics for each of these categories, and then comparing that to this set standard, the minimum threshold. So then undesirable result, what does that mean? So this really answers the question, under what conditions is an undesirable result triggered? So it's quantified by minimum threshold exceedances. So you essentially have to describe the criteria or the circumstances of minimum threshold exceedances that results in an undesirable result. So in other words, just one well exceeding its minimum threshold doesn't necessarily constitute an undesirable result. So again, this one also has a few different components to it. The first being what I just said. And what I just said related to undesirable result occurs when there are three. So this is just an example out of that BMP document. It could be that it occurs when there are 3 of 8 representative monitoring wells that have periodic minimum threshold exceedances over a several year period. So I'll return to that as an example, and you'll see kind of how that could play out. The second component is describing the cause of what you think would lead to an undesirable result. And the third being describing what are the effects on the beneficial uses and users of groundwater of this undesirable result. Really, I mean, that's the whole point, right? Is this condition has some bad result or impact on beneficial uses or users of groundwater. And that's really what's driving this definition of wanting to avoid that condition in the subbasin. So this is a flow chart that's out of that document that's kind of helpful. This presentation is available for your reference, so I won't walk through it, but it's really allows you to think through, okay, just because there's one minimum threshold that's exceeded doesn't necessarily mean that you land in this red box of undesirable results. You really have to look at, does it meet the criteria of combined conditions that leads to that undesirable result condition. Lots of lots of terms here, Sigma jargon. So a couple new other ones are measurable objective. Essentially, the measurable objective is, where do you want to be? These are the water levels, that are really the objective for the subbasin. In a place like the Butte Subbasin, where water levels are pretty stable, pretty shallow, and we're probably there. But that's something that we can look at as we begin to put these things together and look at specific graphs from the data in the subbasin. So, and in addition to measurable objectives, really the difference between the measurable objective and that set minimum threshold, that's your operational range of flexibility, right? We want to see water levels stay within that minimum and maximum, essentially. And then along the way, we have to set interim milestones as well, as this planning horizon is really a 20-year planning horizon to reach sustainability. We may describe in our plan that we're already sustainable in the Butte Subbasin, or outline the steps that would be needed to reach sustainability for each of these indicators. Okay, so here coming back to that example of essentially, let's say the GSA defines the criteria such that minimum threshold exceedances at 3 or more representative monitoring sites constitutes an undesirable result. So now you have this picture of the subbasin, you have monitoring wells throughout, and in this case, you have one monitoring well whose water levels dipped below the minimum threshold for a few years, but then it pulled out of that, right? So in this case, this is a basin that's being sustainably managed. There was a minimum threshold exceedance, but there was no undesirable result because the criteria for that was not met. In a second example with the same kind of undesirable result criteria, here we have 3 wells that for a time were exceeding their minimum threshold, but clearly the basin took some actions, project and management actions, to address their unsustainable conditions, and water levels kind of pulled out of that in the long-term planning horizon. And so this is a subbasin that's also being sustainably managed. And those undesirable results, although they were occurring for a time, were eliminated within the 20-year planning horizon. And then finally, in this case, we have 3 wells that are exceeding their minimum thresholds and continuing to do so with no kind of hope trajectory for improvement. And so this basin is not being sustainably managed, and undesirable results are occurring based on the measured data in relationship to these locally defined standards for what sustainability is and looks like. So with that, just sum up, sustainability really is demonstrated by the avoidance of undesirable results for the 6 sustainability indicators. It really is this comparison between measured and observed conditions in the basin based on each of these 5, in our case, sustainability indicators, to show that the conditions in the basin do or don't kind of meet the criteria for sustainability. So the sustainability goal sums it all up in a statement. We're going to be talking about this more tonight. It's a description of 1, the objective for the management of the basin, 2, the measures that are going to be taken to manage the basin, that's your project management actions, and then 3rd, how those measures will lead to sustainability. So it's really the whole wrap-up statement. So in essence, if there are no undesirable results occurring, then the basin is operating within its sustainable yield and sustainability goal is being achieved. So the evidence of the sustainability goal being met is the fact that no undesirable results are occurring. So this is a recap slide. I'm not going to go through it because I basically just did, but it's a good reference. Just defining again, it's all really hinging on how has significant unreasonable conditions been defined, kind of qualitatively, and then what does that look like when you make it quantitative by drawing lines on graphs and establishing really what conditions in the subbasin cause impacts that are undesirable and unacceptable, essentially. So with that, I will Welcome any questions or discussion, or Byron can take it from here.
Thank you, Christina, for a very good, clear presentation to lay the foundation for sustainable management criteria. Are there any general questions about anything that Christina has presented? And if you want to go back to a particular slide to better understand the concept, do let us know. Maybe you could just, Christina, take it out of slide view so we can
Sure.
see those. You can share your screen if anyone has questions, and then we can look at the particular slide. So are there any questions? First, starting with the Butte Advisory Board members. And first, I'd like to welcome Deborah Lucero, who's representing Butte County on the BAB this evening. I know you had another meeting, and so really appreciate you juggling all those responsibilities, Supervisor Lucero. So any questions of Christina about the basics of the SMC before we actually move into a preliminary discussion of the sustainability goal and undesirable results? Okay, that's BAB members. I don't see any questions. How about members of the public? Do you have any questions for Dr. Buck this evening about the basics of the sustainable management criteria? I'm not seeing any. And I'll just say, for those of you who are just joining by phone, if there's some question you have, I'll just give you a moment to take yourself off of mute in case you have a question. All righty. Well, Byron, are you here? Yes, Byron, I saw you came back in. So Byron, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to frame up this discussion, take the preliminary information that Christina has provided this evening to begin our discussion of the draft sustainability goal and significant and unreasonable condition statements. Byron?
Great. Thank you, Tanya. I had to drop off and restart because I was having some audio problems, and it now looks like I'm unable to share my screen. So if you guys could make me a co-host, I'll bring up this next segment.
Sorry about that. There you go, Byron.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, again, if you'll just bear with me, I'll get to the proper screen. Great. There we go. So yeah, thank you, Christina, for the great overview and description of the sustainable management criteria, which are very foundational to the development and implementation of the groundwater sustainability plan. So what I would like to present are draft statements of the sustainability goal and what we're referring to as the significant and unreasonable conditions statements aligned with each of the sustainability indicators. And so what these are, I mean, I kind of think of the sustainable management criteria as an umbrella, with the sustainability goal sort of at the top as an overarching goal of what we're trying to achieve in the subbasin, which is supported by these statements of significant and unreasonable conditions. And then underpinning those will ultimately be these quantitative indicators in terms of the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives that will be used to evaluate sustainability moving forward. And so what we've done and what has been included in the materials for this meeting are to develop draft statements for the sustainability goal and for the undesirable results statements. And so in terms of process, these are basically drafts at this point. I don't believe there's an action item or any decision that needs to be made right now. Ultimately, these would be finalized as part of the adoption of the GSP. But at this time, they provide us with a foundation for developing the thresholds, kind of collectively referring to both minimum thresholds and measurable objectives that we'll use here moving forward in developing the GSP. And so I guess I would like to say that these are totally unique to the Butte Subbasin, but frankly, we've relied on information developed for neighboring subbasins and other subbasins in the state in order to develop these somewhat general statements that qualitatively describe what our objectives are in terms of developing and implementing the GSP. And so with regards to the sustainability goal, our draft at this time basically states that the sustainability goal for the Butte Subbasin GSP is to maintain through a cooperative and partnered approach, locally managed sustainable groundwater resources to preserve and enhance the economic viability, social well-being, and culture of all beneficial uses and users without experiencing undesirable results. And so that is now highlighted there and is before you for discussion. And then with regards to each of the applicable sustainability indicators, we've developed similar, again, somewhat qualitative statements, recognizing that the specific definition of an undesirable result, as Christina described, will include a more quantitative indicator of what number of thresholds would need to be exceeded in order to represent a undesirable result, and over what period of time that would be considered. And so rather than read through all these, I'll use levels as an example. And the draft statement there is that the undesirable result for chronic lowering of groundwater levels is a result that would cause significant and unreasonable reduction in the long-term viability of beneficial uses and users over the planning and implementation horizon of this GSP. And what you'll see in your packet are that many of these are quite similar, fairly general, but provide an overview of what we're trying to avoid, essentially. A couple that are unique are the seawater intrusion. As Christina described, we don't feel that that is an applicable sustainability indicator because seawater intrusion is not present and is not likely to occur in the Butte Subbasin due to the distance from the Pacific Ocean, bays, deltas, or inlets. And that position really stems from DWR's guidance document, the best management practice for sustainable management criteria. So it's very consistent with the direction that DWR has provided, and we think applicable in this subbasin. Water quality is also somewhat unique. And so because there are existing regulatory programs to address water quality with respect to agriculture, as well as the drinking water program, we saw the Title 22, and because the authority and responsibilities of the GSAs are really limited to any impacts to water quality that would result from groundwater pumping or recharge activities. The statement here is a bit unique. And so what we've drafted and are proposing is that the undesirable result for degraded water quality is a result stemming from a causal nexus between groundwater quantity related activities, such as groundwater extraction or groundwater recharge, and groundwater quality that causes significant and unreasonable effects to the beneficial uses and users, including reduction in the long-term viability of these uses over the planning and implementation horizon of the GSPs. This one's a bit unique also. And so some of the questions we have are, to help guide our work moving forward, recognizing that these are general statements, are there any considerations missing that you would like to include or like us to consider? Is there consensus about focusing on water quality only as concerning with the causal nexus between groundwater quantity related activities? And given that we address salinity concerns with water quality, are there any concerns about identifying seawater intrusion as not applicable in the subbasin? So with that, I'll stop and look forward to discussion.
Byron. And if we could take that last one first, because this was a point of discussion at the last BAB meeting in October, and it seemed that there was support for approaching it this way, realizing that it was consistent with DWR guidance, and given the distance from the coast, deltas and inlets, as you say, and for any salinity concerns that could potentially exist, that would be viewed as a water under the water quality, the groundwater quality indicator, not, as you say here, not seawater intrusion. So because we've already discussed this, we're ground truthing it. And so maybe we could just start there, and I'll ask BAB members if there's anyone who has concerns with this approach of treating salinity concerns as a water quality under the water quality sustainability indicator as opposed to seawater intrusion. And then I'll ask you for, if I don't hear any concerns, I would like an affirmative response, and I'll ask for a thumbs up. So does this require any discussion, or anyone have concerns looking at that third question? BAB members? And so I just want some, an affirmation on this, which is very helpful for David's engineering, right? So they can have confidence in how the technical consulting team moves forward. And so if I could get a thumbs up, you can open your participant window, BAB members, and you should be able to find under more, which are those three dots, a thumbs up, or you can also go under reactions on your main toolbar and you'll see a yellow thumbs up. Can I see a thumbs up for that last question there? Given that we address salinity concerns and water quality, are there any concerns about identifying seawater intrusion as not applicable in the Butte subbasin? Are you finding your thumbs up? Okay, got it. Thanks, Gary, Stone, Hans, Bo, Terry. Let me just go down the line. Anjanette, any concerns there? You may be giving me a thumbs up some other way and I'm not seeing it. Okay, Deborah.
I did it twice. It doesn't stay up, so I don't know what else you want me to write or do.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was looking in the participant window, which is the blue thumbs up. The other thumbs up doesn't stay up, as you say. And then we got Peter as well. Let's see, did I miss anybody else? Here, just looking down the line, want to make sure I'm getting everyone. Thanks, Mark, Terry. Okay. I think we've got everyone who is present. Thank you for your hands up, your thumbs up on that. Okay, so going to some of these other questions, going to the top of the list here of the questions that David's engineering is posing. So recognizing that these are general statements, so there will be, for these undesirable results, future discussions that where there will be the quantitative setting of measurable objectives and minimum thresholds. But to start out this process, these are pretty general statements because this is a preliminary discussion on SMC. So recognizing that these are general statements, are there any considerations missing that you would like to include? And so if we, maybe Byron, if we could go to the top of your list here and start with the sustainability goal to see if there are any considerations missing that you'd like to include, or if there's anything related to this is the qualitative sustainability goal that you think requires any further discussion or you'd like clarification. So BAB members, looking at that highlighted text there, any missing considerations or anything you'd like to discuss?
And maybe just to add to that, Tanya, I mean, obviously these are very general statements, but if there are specific things that we should be mindful of as we start to evaluate the thresholds themselves, any input would be welcome at this time. And some things we have in mind, for example, would be, you know, protecting domestic wells or protecting flood control infrastructure, i.e. levees from subsidence, or you know, any of those types of ideas that are not specifically stated in these general statements. Input would be very welcome on.
I have a question. I just have a question. I was just wondering, and because I'm late, I may have missed some of the prelude, so I don't know if this is the proper paragraph or place, but would you be considering, when you say maintain through a cooperative and partnered approach, locally managed sustainable groundwater resources to preserve and enhance the economic viability, social well-being, and culture of all beneficial users? What I'm wondering is about the natural environment. Does that play a role in that paragraph?
Yes, absolutely. The natural environment is very explicitly identified in Sigma as a beneficial use of groundwater. And so, for example, groundwater dependent ecosystems need to be identified as part of the plan and need to be considered in setting these sustainable management criteria.
So I just wondered, like, would you say something there, like to preserve, protect the natural environment and enhance the economic viability, social well-being? You know what I mean? Something like that. I didn't know if that was the right place to put something like that.
Yeah, that certainly could be included. In an earlier draft of this statement, we did list agriculture, industry, municipal uses, environment, tribal uses, etc., as examples of the beneficial uses of water. So we could certainly be more explicit about that as part of this.
Well, I just think that in this paragraph, the way it's written, it just applies to users of water.
You know, what this is raising, I think, Deborah, and I think that may be the case for many people who aren't familiar with this term, beneficial uses and users, since environmental uses are included by law.
Okay. All right.
But to your point, if you want this to be understood for the lay person, right, that there could be some value in calling those out in the way that Byron just suggested, you know, or that he named, that you could provide examples of what we mean by beneficial uses for users. Byron, any follow on there?
No, I would just reinforce that, yes, we can be more explicit and specifically define what those uses are.
Do you think
that would be helpful?
Do you think that would be helpful? Interested in what others think about that, realizing that this term beneficial uses and users can feel a little abstract. What do other BAB members think about potentially being more explicit about examples of what we mean?
This is Bo Shepherd. I think that would be good. Some of the things that Byron mentioned, flood control, it would be nice to have a little broader definition of everything that would be included, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bo. How about any others? Do you agree with Deborah and Bo really looking for that to be more explicitly defined here?
Tanya, this is Anjanette. I'm typing in the chat because I don't have anything that tells me to raise my hand. The 3 dots don't give me that. So I think my comments just echoed Bo's.
Uh-huh, right. So by the way, Anjanette, you're raising your hand. You should just be able to open your participant window and see a little blue hand at the bottom of that box, but it's fine for you to put it in your in the chat.
Unfortunately, my Zoom is blinking off and on and I can't use the controls for some reason. So I'm not sure what's going on.
Sorry about that. Right, so you say, I thought we could put water code reference for beneficial users, or we have to list all of them and explain them the same way as being discussed. So is that, do you have a concern about it, including some examples of it? Or are you saying that you, tell me more about that. Do you think that it would be cumbersome to include all of them?
I mean, we can, it just makes it for a longer document that's going to be spelled out in the GSP anyway. So if people feel more comfortable listing them all, that's fine with me. But that was the reasoning behind keeping it short and sweet.
Yeah, understood.
And like I said, I came in this late, and so understanding that beneficial uses has that broader meaning. If this comes with a glossary of terms or something like that, that can always, be somewhere else to explain those kinds of really important definitions.
Right, like a citation by reference so that you could see how Sigma defines beneficial uses, users and uses,
Right.
right?
And
Right.
that way you don't leave anything out and you don't put something in and then people are stuck on that. You could have a longer definition somewhere else.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable approach. And and wouldn't you anticipate, Byron, that that would likely be the case where you would have a glossary of definitions and it could be accomplished in that way?
Yes, yeah, I think there will be other aspects of the plan where the beneficial uses and users will be described in greater detail. But that's, I really appreciate your comment and question, Supervisor Lucero, and there's no reason that we wouldn't necessarily include it as part of this sustainability goal statement.
Right, to keep it very straightforward, but still make sure that people understand that and have that term defined. Okay, if anyone has concerns with that approach, please do speak up and let us know. Otherwise, I think that we have come to a set of ideas and a solution for how to address that. Okay, now how about moving on to these undesirable result statements? Again, there will be quantitative statements associated with each of these undesirable results. These are to get us started with the generalized statements. Are there any considerations that you would like to see included in these undesirable results statements at this time? Byron in his presentation clarified that many of them are quite similar in how they're structured. There are a couple that are unique. So when we look at levels and storage, for example, they're structured in a very similar way. So why don't we take those two first to see if any BAB members would like have questions or would like for some other considerations to be included. Byron, anything else to say there for framing?
I think what I heard from Bo is that perhaps we should embellish these a bit to describe what types of things we're considering in terms of undesirable results. And so that additional detail could be added. Like for example, in terms of levels with respect to flood protection, for example. So
what was that example? I didn't quite catch that.
Oh, or actually it would be more with regards to subsidence, but impacts to levees, on flood protection infrastructure that could compromise the ability to protect lands from floods.
Right. So for these undesirable result statements, there could be some benefit to providing some examples of what an undesirable impact might look like. Right.
Yeah, and so yeah, for example, for groundwater levels, the potential to strand or dewater wells, as well as increased pumping costs due to increased lift, those types of things that are certainly on our minds and things that we want to protect. That we incorporating.
Okay, I think it's helpful, Byron, that you're providing those examples. Would you be able to, since that's your screen, just maybe type, as those things are coming up, type sort of a bulleted list there to under like the levels. You just put up some examples, or wherever you want to put it. I think that that could maybe be some food for thought for folks, you know, as they're considering these things. So are some other explicit considerations coming up for you, BAB members, as you think this through? Thanks for putting those there, Byron.
This is by no means exhaustive.
Yes,
It's
yeah,
still-
to get some ideas flowing. Okay, so any BAB members, any thoughts that you have about other more explicit considerations under these statements?
Under quality, I know in North Chico, this isn't, what we're talking about here, but I know that nitrates are a concern. Would that be something under quality, or is that not the kind of thing you're looking? This is the contaminants you're talking about then, right? Or
I think that's correct, and I would invite others to weigh in. I think in the context of Sigma, our main concern would be if there are nitrate issues, we would want to avoid mobilizing that nitrate through pumping activities or recharge activities that might occur.
okay.
So not to dismiss that concern, but generally speaking, I think that would be addressed through like the irrigated lands regulatory program, water program. And again, I'd invite others to weigh in on that.
What do others think? Other BAB members? I see, Jim, you have your hand up. Let me just check in with Butte Advisory Board members first to see if there are any other comments, and then I'll come back to you, Jim. Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Under quality, I know Byron mentioned nitrates, but also the volatile organic compound plumes that exist in various places around. And if there are any in the Butte Basin, I know there's some in the Vina Basin, but we want to make sure that we don't mobilize any of these contaminated plumes. And on groundwater level, I was satisfied to leave groundwater dependent ecosystems as assumed. But if you're going to put bullet points on it for lowering of groundwater and having to do with wells, then certainly GDEs should be one of the bullet points on levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Byron.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. How about any other? So we're including these as, possible considerations, right? They ultimately, we don't know exactly how it will appear in the plan, but I think it's helpful at this point for those things that are important to you, that you want the technical team to be considering, that we name them, right? And so as Byron is sort of creating this bulleted list to get our thoughts flowing, I invite any other comments from BAB members or members of the public. So you've just put a potential consideration there, Byron, for land subsidence. And how about depletion of interconnected surface water?
Yeah, I think there, GVEs again come into play there, groundwater dependent ecosystems, as well as surface water bodies that support anadromous fish and other important ecosystems.
Mhm. Go ahead, Jim.
Also, under depletion of interconnected surface water, certainly surface water rights can be impaired when more water is leaking into the aquifer and there's less water flowing down the streams. And so for people who have a right to divert water for agricultural purposes, yeah, there it is, surface water rights is a consideration.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. So how about others? Any other considerations that when you think about really what's important to you and for the potential of undesirable conditions, what do you want to make explicit here beyond what has already been identified? Is that a new hand, Jim?
Yes, it is.
Go ahead.
Under land subsidence, I don't know if you've got structures, private structures. I know there's a gentleman over in Glenn County that has had some problems with his home foundation as the land is subsiding unevenly under his property. So it's a private property issue as well. Yeah, there it is. Thanks, Byron.
Yeah, good point. And those the buildings are certainly vulnerable as well.
Okay, any other thoughts here, considerations that you want to name? And then Byron, because you've been, because you do this for a living, are there, when you think about like a menu of considerations, are there other possibilities that you would throw out there for the BAB's consideration? Anything else?
I'd like to ruminate on it a little bit. I feel like this is a pretty good list. Nothing's jumping to mind immediately, but sort of some additional thought.
Okay, and didn't mean to put you on the spot there. So you all have this document, right? And so you can take a look at it following the meeting and be in touch with Byron, be in touch with us if there's anything else that comes up for you that you would like to be considered. And Byron, if you were to get some additional comments or considerations from folks, when would you like to see those? What might be a deadline for people to get some other considerations to you?
January 31st, 2022. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
Like I discussed when we were talking about the timeline, obviously none of this will be final until that point in time. But we're really launching into the development of options for discussion of these specific thresholds. And so I hate to put deadlines on people, but in the next few weeks, mid-January, would be great.
Right. Okay, mid-January, right? Because then the next step, as you said in your timeline, will really be to dig a bit deeper, really be focusing on the options, the development of the measurable objectives, the minimum thresholds, which will be quantified, right?
Right.
Okay, so then looking at another question that you've posed here, so Karen, I see that you've asked the question if you want if you want to provide comments to Byron, how do you get in touch with him? And Byron, maybe you could just put in the chat how you prefer to be communicated with, maybe your email address, so everyone could get in touch with you if you'd like.
Sure.
If they'd like. Okay, thanks for the question, Karen. And okay, going to the second question on the discussion questions, is there consensus about focusing on water quality only as concerning with a causal nexus between groundwater quantity related activities such as groundwater extraction or groundwater recharge? Anything else? You've mentioned this already when you went into the overview, Byron, but is there anything else to say there to give guidance to folks if they want to give you some input on that question?
I'm not sure that this answers the question sufficiently or not, but I think the way we've kind of been regarding water quality in the context of Sigma is that there are several existing and well-established and ongoing programs that address water quality issues, and that the GSAs have very limited authorities in terms of addressing water quality, that are limited to regulating groundwater extraction and groundwater recharge. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but I think that's certainly the way we're looking at things right now.
Well, that's the intent of the question, right? Just wanted you to sort of clarify that further for folks. So is there any discussion about this question that's been posed here among BAB members? About that connection between groundwater quantity related activities, having water quality only be concerning, that nexus with groundwater quantity, given that there's a whole host of other regulatory programs and requirements for water quality that are sort of outside of Sigma, right? Whether it's irrigated lands or any other program. Any discussion there, BAB members? Any questions or concerns about that question that Byron has posed?
I have a question, Tanya.
Go ahead, Christina.
If that's okay. So this is potentially where kind of the nitrates, if that's a problem in the basin, could come into play with regards to a recharge project, right? Do you think that's the case? If there was potential for, just considering water quality issues, and nitrate might be one that's relevant to a recharge project.
Right. So for example, if there's a substantial nitrate concentration in the root zone, if you will, and then you were to do recharge, and that nitrate were to move into the groundwater system, that would be something that we need to evaluate and address, right, as part of the permitting process for that given hypothetical project. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, your sound is a little bit muffled. Just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you.
But I think we caught it though.
Yeah, so I think that's where it would take advantage of essentially the work potentially of the irrigated lands as well, and data available there.
Right, and for any given project, there would be a CEQA and or NEPA process, right?
Yeah.
Evaluate potential impacts that would need to occur.
And how do you tell us more about how you would sort of incorporate the work of the irrigated lands programs, or if it's important to engage with those folks who are involved in the irrigated lands program, who are complying with these laws related to these regulations related to water quality. So the question really is, what are the implications for the GSP planning process to make sure that there is this this nexus between those programs and those stakeholders? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I'd invite Christina to comment also, or others. I think as part of the plan, we need to clearly describe the existing programs that are in place and being implemented to address water quality. Also, as we identify projects and management actions that might be implemented to address potential sustainability concerns, we'll need to identify the associated permitting process. We'll need to think about what the potential impacts of those projects might be on things like water quality.
Okay.
But yeah, that's my response.
Christina, any thoughts there? So Byron's talked about how that would come into play in the GSP is to describe existing programs related to water quality. And then also it may be a part of the analysis, assessment and analysis of the projects and management actions to determine if there could potentially be a water quality impact.
Yeah,
Does that sound right?
Yeah, I would just add that the groundwater conditions section of the basin setting does have water quality as a section, and so the existing programs are described there as kind of background basin setting.
So they're already described there in the basin setting work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any further discussion on this topic among BAB members or any members of the public? Okay, and any other feedback that you'd like to provide Byron Clark at this point about these general statements related to the sustainability goal and the significant and unreasonable condition statements.
I would
Tanya? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Byron.
No, you go ahead, Antoinette.
I'm just wondering as I'm listening, I'm just wondering if there is any concern. I haven't been aware of any water quality problems in the North State, besides those plumes that Jim mentioned, localized. So I'm just wondering if there's a concern out there that people know about that we may not know about.
Good question. Thank you, Antoinette. Does anyone know of any water quality concerns that you'd like to raise?
I can only speak for the Vina GSA, in North Chico. I know we have some concerns above and beyond the plumes that many residents are raising, at least with me, and have come to some supervisors meetings. And those mostly are dealing with nitrate levels in their wells, which are going up. In fact, one guy just contacted me a couple of days ago, and he's been tracking it for 6 years, and every year it's gone up, and this year it's at like 38 parts per million, and I guess like 2 more points, and that's where you would have to use potable water.
So that is in the Vina Subbasin, which we know is very groundwater dependent, right? And quite a different basin, even though it's close geographically, than it's quite different than the Butte Subbasin. So anyone, thank you, Supervisor Lucero. Are there any other known concerns, water quality concerns in the Butte Subbasin that anyone would like to raise, or concerns that you've heard about that you'd like further investigated? Okay, Byron, anything else before we close up this topic and talk a little bit about outreach and engagement?
Just to thank everybody for this great discussion, for your input.
And so Byron, let me
appreciate it, and we look forward to additional input moving forward.
And so Byron, let me just check in with you one last time. Is there, because you you need to take this input that you receive and move the process forward. So is there any input that you would like to receive from the BAB tonight that you have yet to get on this subject?
Well, again, I think based on this useful and helpful discussion, we can work with staff and develop kind of updated drafts of these statements of both the sustainability goal and desirable results, and develop updated versions. I think we should talk internally probably about whether there needs to be a formal adoption process of the draft statements at the
it looks like you may
fold into the overall GSP.
Okay, yeah, it looks like you may have frozen
Sorry.
for a moment, but I'll just summarize what I think you've said there. As the BAB knows, the GSA managers meet in the alternating months when the advisory board does not meet, and they sort of tee up the discussion, develop the agendas with the technical team and the facilitation team. And so we can take this back into the GSA managers and refine these statements based on this discussion, and then decide what and consider what the next steps will be with these statements. Sound right?
Yeah. I look forward to the guidance of Christina and Anjanette and others on the team as we move forward.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you very much, Byron. So you can go ahead and take off your screen share. And I'd like to just have a general conversation with the Butte Advisory Board members. As we're beginning the sustainable management criteria discussions, it really is quite important that we are engaging as many as many stakeholders as possible, as many people who are users of groundwater, who are affected by the decisions that are being contemplated and made here. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about, when you look around the Zoom table, as we've had these meetings over the last several months, who do you think are important groups who haven't been participating? And then what might be some of your ideas about how best to engage those groups? So really a two-part question there. And it's sort of this feeling like, do you look around and you start to get a little concerned, like, where is this group or where is that group? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, because now is a critical point for us to really reach out to folks and get them involved. BAB members? Gary Stone with Richvale Irrigation District.
In our area, our district, we have the community of Richville, which is unincorporated. And with the COVID situation, it's been difficult, the best to do any communicating. We haven't had a lot of information to communicate yet, but it'll be a challenge to, there's 110 homes and, 10 businesses to communicate and get the input from them at some point. I think we're early in the timeline to do that, but.
Yeah, okay, that's great. We can talk with the GSA managers about how to really get information out to those 110 homes, as you say, and when would be the most critical time to get them involved. I appreciate your input there, Gary.
Thanks.
And how about others when you're thinking about these groups? Did I hear someone? Okay, may have just been an audio blip. So any other thoughts here about folks who aren't currently participating that we should reach out to, or folks who are hard to get in touch with, that we have to really start thinking about how can we communicate with them, particularly in this time of COVID? As we are 10 months or 9 months into just being on distance, remote meetings. And it looks like that's not going to be changing for the next few months at least. Any other thoughts about who we should be reaching out to and how? How about anybody joining as a member of the public? What are your thoughts about this? You know, I'd like to check in. Check in with each of the GSAs maybe to see if there's any group any entity or group or set of stakeholders who you really would like to try to reach out to, or you're concerned that they may not be participating. I just want to get more voices into this conversation. And so anyone from Biggs, West Gridley Water District, when you're thinking about who's important to be involved or what groups? Any ideas?
Tanya, can I add like a two-part question to your question? We could also, if for the people that are in the Zoom room, like also ways to engage with you as well would be also welcomed.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, ways to engage with you more effectively who are currently participating, given particularly the challenges that we're facing with COVID-19. So either one, so any ideas either for those who aren't participating, who you think it's important to reach out to, or for yourselves, how we can do that more effectively. I just want to do a little go round to see if there are any thoughts from Biggs, West Gridley, either from Jean or Mike Farr, or Jean Massa. Any ideas there?
You know, Tanya, we actually set up this workshop in the hopes that we could try to get that participation out there. And I think a lot of what we're seeing today is, I mean, I hate to say it, COVID really strikes us hard. So we're doing a workshop right when Butte County is probably in one of its worst, positions. They're in a lockdown scenario. Yeah, we're online, and yes, that works, but it's been really hard to have the interaction of people coming into your office where you can actually talk to them and try to describe this to them. And I think just the time is going to allow that. It might be where we move forward and have to let DWR know that due to COVID, all the plans across the state may just be dynamic and need to be changed as interests start popping up because of the simple basis that COVID was a hamstring to us. And tell you that there's interest out there. How do I know that? They won't come in my office, nor can I let them in my office. So the one-on-one, I mean, I can, if I thought about it, I would have already called them or talked to them.
Yeah, understood, Jean. How about Butte County? What are your thoughts, Deborah, Supervisor Lucero?
Well, I was just thinking about some of the small farmers, that are out in that area that I could think of, I was thinking about a couple of pig farmers that I know and a cattle rancher. I think they would be interested in participating. I just didn't know how to invite folks like that to the conversation.
We could, and it might be helpful let me know, do you think it might be helpful for us to sort of develop a general outreach flyer similar to our
maybe something, that we could send out to them via email.
Right.
Yeah.
We're doing that in some other places. Okay.
That would be great, because I can think of probably 6 people that are in the, either Oroville, South Gridley, Biggs area that would probably would love to attend, but they're not really aware of it. And then it's hard to remind people because everybody's got that COVID time frame where you lose track of time, it seems. So
So true. Isn't that so true? Okay, well, we are doing that in some other places, and it occurs to me that that might be a good way for you all to be ambassadors, right? If you have your own contact list, to be able to just send out those flyers, informing them of these meetings and the other existing venues. So that's something we certainly can do. And thank you for that, Supervisor Lucero. How about the Butte Water District? Pete, do you have any ideas?
I think you've covered pretty much all of them. I'm a little concerned that we have difficulty even attending our monthly meetings with the COVID restrictions. So I think that's been a little bit of a problem for us.
You in your own, you mean even in your own water district?
Yes, correct.
Uh-huh. I see, because that's an important venue, is it not, to communicate?
It
your
is.
Yeah.
It is very difficult to do it by phone. We've tried that and it hasn't worked that well.
Mhm.
Is it possible, Peter, with the water districts to send out a notice in the water bills?
That could be. It only happens once a year, but yes, it could.
Yeah, I
When
was
does that,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Deborah, when does that happen, Pete?
Oh, we only send out a water bill or have people come in once a year to sign up for water. She was asking about being able to send something with that bill.
Yeah, I was wondering, is that timed? When is that timed, the water bill, or is it
In the
different?
spring. It's in the spring.
Oh, in the spring. Okay, well, it's good to know that. Okay, we can talk about that with the GSA managers as a possible tool, right? Of, okay. Anything else there, Pete?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay, and let me just go to the city of Biggs to see if you have some ideas that are unique to your own organization, or thoughts about anything anyone else has said.
So nothing that I can add. I think the flyer would, be something good that we could send to our individual contacts. I'm actually surprised that we haven't had more Zoom participants. But I have to tell you, when we were holding the meetings in Biggs or just starting to, many of the people that I knew were planning on coming to attend. And then, COVID happened. So for me, I would definitely send the flyer out. I have printed off stuff and taken it to these friends of mine in Gridley. Some of them are farmers too. And so I am puzzled why there isn't more interest other than, the COVID thing. But, because people have expressed that they are interested. But, then things changed. And so, for me, I think sending a flyer with, the log-on information and whatnot would be a good step, at least for my contacts.
That's great to know, Bo. And you'll recall you and Mark Sorensen, when we had our first meeting at at the city facilities there, and there were quite a few people. There were quite a few members of the public there, right?
There was.
Yeah. And that was a really nice space to do it. Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, but it sounds like the flyer may be a good idea. Mark, did you have anything to add? Mark Sorensen, City of Biggs?
No, just the flyer idea. Of our about 750 customers now, roughly almost 500 are electronic bills. So we're not mailing to them, but we do have email addresses, so we can convey it that way.
Oh, good. Yeah, that would be great. Okay, good. And how about Colusa Groundwater Authority? I know you don't have representatives here today, but Mary, as a staff member, any thoughts?
Yeah, we of course in the Colusa Basin, it's highly agricultural, so we are always trying hard to get the word out to our ag folks. And we do several of our irrigation districts that are on our board have email lists. And so we'll send out notices and then they will forward those out to their constituents, the folks in their districts. And that's always really helpful. Newspaper articles as well, or just notices in the local papers are good. The one thing we're struggling with a little bit is the Spanish language folks. So we've been just recently kind of working with DWR on their written translation services and trying to get some outreach to that community in our basin. But that's been hard.
Okay, well, you brought up some good ideas there, Mary. Thanks. About particularly when we get to these critical meetings, looking at newspaper articles and ads in the newspaper as a possibility. Really trying to use your board members, right? If
Yeah.
we were to send a flyer, for example, really encouraging your various board members at your GSAs to get them out to their constituents. I know for the Butte Subbasin, Mary, it's you have a very small footprint, you know, in the Butte Subbasin, but I really appreciate your ideas there. And I see that Karen, I'm going to get to you in a moment. I've seen that your hand is up and that you have a comment there. I'm just going through the BAB members and then definitely want to get to members of the public as well. So RD 1004, Hans, any thoughts here to add?
Yeah, nothing unique to what's already been said. I think a flyer to our constituents, our water users would be effective.
Okay, good to know. I'm glad we're getting a little bit of traction on that one piece, but it sounds like there are other things we could be considering as well. And Gary, Gary Stone, you already gave us a couple of ideas. If there's anything you have to add from Richvale?
No, I think, yeah, nothing new to what everybody else has said. We're good.
Okay. And anything else to add from Western Canal? Any other thoughts? I know you do a lot of outreach and engagement. So do you have some advice or some ideas?
I just typed in the chat and Mariana wrote it, but it might behoove a couple of the board members to maybe reach out to KNVN, Action News Now, or Chico ER and have them do more of a story on the efforts in all the basins. I don't know how Paul feels about that. Or we could do one specific to Butte Subbasin.
And
Yeah.
I was thinking, Tanya, what about the Butte County Farm Bureau, putting it in their newsletter?
Yeah, good ideas, really good ideas. Yeah, and there may be an opportunity to have there be some coordinated effort at like a bigger article or get it out on the news, right? What's happening in all of these three subbasins. And when it makes sense for them to be unique, then they can be unique to the subbasins, right? Karen, let me go to you. You've been so patient with your hand up, and I know you've also put a comment in the chat. So to me, why don't you just tell the group what your thoughts are?
Well, thank you. My name's Karen Bion. My family and I are stakeholders in Glenn County, but I decided after learning about this meeting from Mary in the Colusa subwatershed that I should listen in on this. I find this fascinating and I appreciate you allowing me to have a comment. The only reason I know about any of this is through the Orland-Artois Water District, who I asked a year ago to let me know what was going on. I agree with Supervisor Lucero on the outreach to stakeholders. Ways of reaching out would include through water districts, through property tax rolls. I have a friend who lives in Lincoln, California, who is possibly a stakeholder up in Butte County. He raises pistachios between Paradise and Oroville. So I don't know if that's in the subbasin, but he had no idea this was going on. And so I informed him of it today and hope to provide more information to him. But the outreach for something as critical as this, I think is really important. And I'm saying this as an outsider. I know I'm not in Butte County, but this is so critical to all of us that the outreach to stakeholders, as mentioned, is really important because we don't know what's going on. My sister hadn't any idea what's going on. She lives in Glenn County. I don't. And so participation, education is really critical to all of us. And I appreciate all the work that all of you are doing in providing this very valuable service. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Really appreciate you taking your evening to join us here.
I have a question really quick for Karen. So Karen, where is your property? Are you on the west side of the river or the east side of the river?
We are on the west side of the river. We're in Glenn County, so we're off of County Roads S and 30. We're also up by 16 and RR. So we're kind of in a couple of different spots. So we're in the north part of Glenn County.
Okay, so you're actually in the Colusa Basin
Yes,
drain and
we are.
not in the Butte Subbasin? Okay, let's just double check.
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
but I'm interested in seeing what's going on in all of these basins because it's important to all of us.
Yeah, definitely. I totally get that. I just was interested
Yeah.
because you said
Yeah.
Orland Artois.
Yeah, we're Orland Artois on one piece of property, and then we're groundwater on the other part, on other real estate. And so it's the groundwater management that's of obviously critical importance to all of us.
That's great, Karen. And I think you'll be interested to hear the next agenda topic is focused on interbasin coordination, which does, affect the basin that you're in. And, we're also working in the Corning Subbasin and in other places in the Northern Sac Valley. So and we work with Glenn County, and so I can share some information with Lisa Hunter as well, who's a staff member there. Karen, I really appreciate your input. So any other thoughts from Mariana? Some thoughts here?
Yes, I was thinking, I was very inspired by all of your ideas. And I was thinking if I were a user that had never been to one of these meetings, like how accessible is this? So like from your perspective, Karen, or from others, are there any suggestions that you have for us in order to kind of improve the meeting or communicate things in a way that would be accessible for someone that, may find the flyer and join our meetings, like just for out of curiosity, so that they kind of stay engaged and don't like just log off,
Good question.
I'm a Zoom dinosaur. And so I find it challenging every time I log on, but I got here. So I consider that a win. I think that a challenge may be generational because you have people that might be more technologically advanced than I am that are piece of cake getting in. Others, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there's just the real issue of broadband in certain areas that really we don't have access in certain areas, and that could be affected as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Jim, your hand's up.
I was very skeptical of these online meetings when they first began, but it's really given me an opportunity to engage in the adjacent GSAs. I'm not a driver. I catch rides with people. I catch bus rides, or I ride a bicycle. And this has really opened the door to new realms for me. So I'm hoping that even after the COVID sequestration goes on, that we can continue to have some sort of online participation available so that I can continue to see what's happening in the Butte Basin and in Glenn and Colusa County Groundwater Authority meetings. They're all very, very informative. I think it really helps unify us to be able to attend all these different meetings. And so I thank you, Tanya and Mariana, for helping us meet in this online venue. It's working for me.
That's good to know, Jim. You know, I think the next big challenge for us, getting a little ahead of ourselves at the moment, but providing a hybrid at some point is probably going to be necessary, right? There are lots of people, like some of you have already said, that who are not comfortable in this online environment, or don't have the broadband to participate. And once the restrictions are lifted, or we're in this space where we can get together, let's say in smaller groups, and we don't know when that's going to be, but you know, there will be some time in the future when we can actually physically be in rooms together. I think there will be a time when we have to figure out the hybrid, which honestly is the most difficult thing to do, to get good sound quality, to be able to see people when some people are in the room and some aren't. And so I think that's going to be a future challenge for us to address. And Jim, just your comments brought that up for me, realizing that it may be very important in the coming months to be able to allow people to participate and have accessibility online, even when people are starting to meet in rooms. So any other input for us? Let's say you get into the meetings, you're here in these Zoom meetings. Are there other things that, to Mariana's question, are there other things that you would like to see us do in these meetings to help you engage more? Just spend a few more minutes on this, because we were ahead a little bit in our agenda, and I appreciate that you all have been participating in this discussion.
Tanya, just to add something I saw on the chat, was private for me. And Jeanette suggested we could potentially live stream Zoom meetings. So that's an option, that it's live streamed in Facebook or there's other social media where people can just log on their account and see the meeting going on. So if it's something that people are interested in, it could be a possibility.
Live streaming on Facebook or something. Yeah. Yeah, and Karen, I see your comments there to me directly that a hybrid would be great since you live in South Placer. Deborah Lucero, your hand's up.
I was just thinking that something I've seen in terms of engagement, this is for Marianne. I was thinking people love doing the online polls once you're in Zoom, you know, to participate, give options, since, you know, a lot of these terms now and ideas are gelling. It would be faster and it would be more visual to do that kind of thing, and it keeps you engaged.
Yeah, yes, and you know, because you've participated in VINA, we are using other interactive tools there, including polling, which we could apply here more consistently. So thank you for that good feedback. All right, any final thoughts before we give you a bit of an update on what's been happening in interbasin coordination? Okay, thank you for that. I really appreciate all of your feedback there. Very helpful. I think there are things that we can do based on your suggestions, and we will be working on those. So Mariana, let me go ahead and hand it off to you to give an update on our interbasin coordination efforts. We also, just to let you all know, we have a very busy Butte County week. This week, tomorrow, there is a VINA Stakeholder Advisory Committee tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And then there's the first Wyandotte Creek Advisory Committee meeting on Wednesday. So you do have opportunities to join us for those meetings if you'd like. And we will be giving this interbasin coordination update at the VINA Shack meeting tomorrow as well. So Mariana, I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, are you looking at the right screen?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So hello, I'm Mariana. I also work at the Consensus Building Institute, for those of you that hadn't met me already via Zoom. And we have been working with various subbasins in the Northern Sacramento Valley, particularly convening some interbasin coordination meetings. So you can see over here to the left, the map of the various subbasins collaborating and the list to the GSAs. It's really small on your screen, but you can access these slides online as well to see which GSAs are involved. And the list of subbasins that have been participating are Antelope, Bowman, Butte, Calusa, Corning, Los Molinos, Red Bluff, Sutter, Vina, Wyandotte Creek, and Yolo. So for those of you that have heard this presentation before, you'll notice that we now have representatives from Sutter and Yolo in the meeting, so you'll see the names appear. So why are we doing this? Why is inter-basin coordination important? As you will know, the groundwater subbasins are hydrologically connected in the northern Sacramento Valley, many are, and so water management decisions in one basin or processes such as climate change can affect aquifer conditions and could affect flows to other basins. So understanding and accounting for these flows are very important as GSAs move into managing and as GSAs develop their groundwater sustainability plans. So we included a table here with the various subbasins in the GSAs that are represented. We've made some changes from the previous version, including updating some of the websites. So you'll notice various, particularly the Tehama County websites are updated. So you can access the websites and have access to more information about where they're at their GSP, in their GSP development, when their next public meetings are, and so forth. So while most of our work is focused on these subbasins, we will also be coordinating with other subbasins to the north and south, including Anderson, Bend, North Yuba, and South Battle Creek. So these are hyperlinked. So if you access the presentation online, you can just click here and go directly to their website. So our inter-basin coordination priorities and the tools that we've been developing are focused very much on the regulation. So in terms of general coordination, we've developed a directory that we keep updating to have information about the staff, the technical consulting teams, and the facilitators working in those areas. And we are creating outreach materials like this presentation, but we've also created a flyer that was included in the meeting materials for today. And we're constantly asking ourselves, how can we conduct outreach at a regional scale? How can we more engage people and users in this process that is very important and will impact them? In terms of technical coordination, we are focusing on compiling information in a consistent way so that we can create an accurate basis of comparison. So if we get numbers, we know that they're apples to apples and there's a way to compare the numbers from the different models, et cetera. In terms of conflict resolution, we are outlining a roadmap and process to identify and resolve issues as they come up. And in terms of voluntary agreements, so under DWR regulations, neighboring subbasins can decide voluntarily to create agreements, interbasin agreements. So we, as a facilitation team, we've reviewed the different GSPs that have been submitted to explore examples of existing voluntary agreements, and we have been discussing those internally. So our timeline and priorities. We began our work last summer, so summer 2020, and staff and technical consulting teams got together. We discussed shared priorities, desired outcomes for interbasin coordination. And it's really nice to work in this area because there's a long-standing history of coordination among the different staff and consulting teams. So it's a really nice group of people and a very collaborative environment. And so they've identified that they wanted to prioritize sharing technical information with one another. So we've created different information sharing resources. So I mentioned the directory. We've also created a template in which we've been compiling technical information and other resources. So fall and winter, so the past few months, we have been working with the different technical consulting teams to compile information about hydrological models and water budgets. And we have been discussing public outreach, as I mentioned, and communication strategies at a regional level. And next, the upcoming spring and summer, we will continue to coordinate on GSP topics, the process for identifying differences and resolving conflicts as warranted, and the various subbasins will make decisions regarding whether or not to craft voluntary agreements. So we included some images below. So the main technical information that we're focusing on is modeling, cross-boundary flows, stream aquifer interactions at boundaries, and we will also focus on sustainable management criteria and monitoring networks. So these venues, I guess, there are staff meetings and no decisions are made. It's more about how to like coordinate at a regional level. So recent updates. We met on December 1st. There were representatives from 11 subbasins mentioned there. I kept the two new representatives in blue so you can see the difference from the previous presentation that we've provided. And we met to discuss the preliminary findings from the information sharing template and found that the various subbasins are at different stages in their GSP development. So many haven't completed their water budget, so we don't have all the information that we need yet. And we also had a very rich discussion about regional outreach and engagement. We've created different materials. Under Butte County, there's a page, a web page under the Butte County website that describes our interbasin coordination efforts in greater detail. You can access meeting agendas and summaries so you can keep yourself informed of what's going on. And we've also created the flyer that I mentioned. And we wish, like, if you find it interesting or know of people that are interested in interbasin coordination, we welcome or we encourage you to share it broadly so that people are aware of what's going on. And our next steps and opportunities for your input. I mentioned that the subbasins are at different stages in their GSP development. So the staff and consulting teams will meet again in the spring, so February or March, depending on when those numbers are ready. And we'll review, compile data, identify any significant differences, and discuss potential ways to reconcile those differences as warranted. Meanwhile, the technical teams from neighboring subbasins will meet and they'll identify appropriate ways to compare and communicate information regarding model assumptions, cross-boundary flows, and I guess stream aquifer interactions at boundaries. And we will bring key findings from this to you, to the different public venues for an opportunity to get your feedback and your questions about what we find, and we will continue to provide updates such as this one on a regular basis going forward. If you want to know more or get involved, we encourage you to sign up for your GSA's interested party list to get updates such as when meetings happen. You could also contact your GSA representative or attend meetings such as this one to receive more updates. And once again, I include here the link to the interbasin coordination website that is continually updated. And if you have any other questions, we include here the contact information for Dr. Christina Buck from Butte County, my personal information, and Tanya and I are collaborating on this. So this is the update for now, and we would like to open it up for your questions, if any.
So Butte Advisory Board members, we'd like to start with you to see if you have any questions about our interbasin coordination efforts. Just want to emphasize, and then also for those staff members who've been participating, and Byron Clark with David's Engineering has also been participating as a technical consultant. If there's anything in particular that you would like to highlight or add to what Mariana has said, we would welcome that. So first, just looking to the staff and consultants to see if there's anything that you wanted to add.
This is Christina. I guess I would just add that I think all of these efforts kind of benefit from learning from each other, you know, in terms of what data is available or could be available or shared. And an example of that with Sutter being new to the conversation, they're pretty early in their development, but being aware of you know, preliminary numbers that are already out there, say from our basin setting work, is helpful for them to have just kind of in the background as they're developing their numbers, so that if they see early on that there's a big difference, they can dig into that. Whereas if they didn't have any sort of reference point, they wouldn't even know to to look closer. So I think there's that kind of benefit kind of all the way around the table that's happening. And it's really just helping develop the basin setting in each of these subbasins to some degree, that then becomes the information that is feeding into, not totally determining, but feeding into the next step of sustainable management criteria. So that was just one thought I had, and kind of the mutual benefit, I think, as these plans are getting developed.
Right, Christina, and even developing the directory where we just found out, well, who are the right contact people in all of these basins, both their technical teams, their facilitators, and their staff members. So if something's coming up, right, as you say, as they're developing these numbers, they actually could have a shorthand to know who to actually reach out to and have a conversation. So it seems to me that that's already happening, and is one of the benefits of this effort.
Yeah. And having, I would just say one last thing, having that consolidated table of websites of all these different GSAs and these subbasins, I think is really useful too, right? For landowners that may find themselves in more than one subbasin, or stakeholders that are interested in participating throughout the valley. So that's a helpful resource.
Mm-hmm. And Deborah, I see your hand is up there. Just want to check in to see if Byron or any other staff members who've been participating in these discussions wanted to add anything to the presentation, or what Christina has said.
Yeah, I mean, I would just reinforce and support everything that Christina said. I think we're in a very fortuitous and unique situation in the Sacramento Valley. As we're probably all aware, there were several basins that were required to complete and submit their plans by 2020 because they're considered critically overdrafted. And, you know, there's been some discussion as a result of that process that there wasn't a lot of interbasin coordination. And so just given the history of collaborative water management in the Sacramento Valley and the ability to build on those relationships constructively, we're really fortunate, I think, to be where we are at this point in time and working together as we develop the 2022 plans. Also, I just wanted to mention really quickly, so there is an initial work product, and Tanya and Mariana, you can confirm this, but that has been posted on the Vina Shack website that basically provides a fairly detailed comparison of the different models that are being used in the Sacramento Basin to develop the water budgets and to evaluate groundwater conditions now and potentially in the future. So that's something that's out there. It's available. It's an outcome of this effort, and I think is quite informative for those who might be interested.
Thank you for mentioning that, Byron. And Supervisor Lucero?
Yeah, I just had a question on the interbasin meetings that are taking place. There's actually three parts to this question. First of all, I'm wondering who the participants are in these meetings. It sounds like you've had more than one. How are their agendas? How are the meetings documented? And are they recorded? Because if this is a public process, I'm just wondering how the public is involved in that piece of this process.
Yeah, so Butte County has developed a web page for interbasin coordination that is sort of a clearinghouse for a one-stop shop for the agendas as well as the meeting summaries, so that you can stay apprised of the staff and consultant work that's happening. So there's a lot of work of staff and consultant work that goes into preparing for these meetings, for example, or the shack meetings, or the any other public meeting. And really at this point in the process, going to your first question, Deborah, it is the staff and consultants who are compiling the information, figuring out who everybody is, where they are in their respective processes, and trying to get those materials together so they can be shared broadly with the public in a way that makes sense, right? As Mariana said, comparing sort of apples to apples, because not all of the subbasins are at the same point. We aren't at that point where all of the materials can be released because we're still in the information gathering stage. So as Byron mentioned, the first product comparing sort of the modeling information is going to be, has been made available to the Vina Shack and will be discussed a bit tomorrow. And so it really is consultants and staff from each of these subbasins right now. The public venues for all of this information to be shared are these venues. So we are going to continue to, all of this information will be transparently available as it becomes available and is in a meaningful, recognizable, digestible format. And so you can expect more at the BAB, at the Shack, and now at the WAC, which is the Wyandotte Creek Advisory Committee. It will also be shared at the GSA board meetings when information becomes available. So you can expect to find this information in various public meetings going forward.
Tanya, would it be helpful for me to like walk people through the website to know where the materials are found? Or
Well, I guess what I'm wondering, and perhaps that material is there, and what I'm asking is there. I'm just wondering, do you list who's at the meetings, who is participating in the meetings and the agendas and all of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
That's what I was just wondering, to make sure that, we're doing this in a public and transparent way. And that was my concern.
Yes, so you can see here where Mariana is sharing the website. You can find the agendas and the meeting summaries as they become available. They'll be posted. And then you can also see this other information that where Mariana is scrolling down that we've also provided on the flyer so that you can go to the individual websites of the various participating GA.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know this was up. That's
and
great.
Also on the flyer. So on the flyer, you'll see a link to this web page. And I know it's currently, it will be continually updated. Jim and then Mary. Jim.
Yes, I've been following this innovation coordination group since I became aware of it in October. And I've studied all the summaries. I noticed in the August ICG, if you don't mind me putting it into an acronym, Interbasin Coordination Group, ICG, the summary explained that by November 19th, the consultants will fill out most of the information on cross-boundary flows, stream aquifer interactions, and common hydrogeologic understanding. The August group planned to reconvene on December 1st to review the compiled data, identify significant differences, and discuss potential ways to reconcile the differences. And the consultant promised that this information will be presented to the public for an opportunity to ask questions and provide input. In my opinion, complete information on cross-boundary flows and stream aquifer interactions and a common hydrogeologic understanding is a prerequisite as we move forward on PMAs with Sigma. There have been large discrepancies between basin setting and water budget reports about these cross-boundary flows during the initial stages of groundwater sustainability planning. Also, during the July ICG meeting, the group agendized North Sac Valley Interbasin public outreach and engagement. And in my opinion, the public outreach and engagement has been minimal, if not non-existent. You'll notice in the December meeting, the agenda is posted, but the summary hasn't been posted. And I don't know why. It's been, it's been 13 days. I'm very curious to find out if any of these things that were promised were delivered. But when I looked at the agenda, it looks like they weren't even discussed if the agenda holds true. I think that a discussion identifying carrying capacity of the water supply in the North State is needed as we struggle to plan managing demand. managing demand is going to be, in my opinion, one of the most important project management actions, rather than trying to endlessly increase supply. Suggesting limitations on continued urban and agricultural expansion through interbasin coordination is a reasonable, though I understand politically charged issue that will need to be addressed eventually. And that's what I'm anticipating once we get a common hydrogeological understanding, that we're going to begin to understand the limitations, the carrying capacity, and then come up with hopefully voluntary agreements. Because I understand by some of the summaries that some of the participants do not want binding agreements. They want voluntary agreements. I'm hoping we don't have to resort to adjudication, but there's a good chance we're going to have to go to adjudication, because water use and water rights tend to be very controversial and very protected and enhanced by people that have them and people that want them. So when I see interbasin coordination group, I recognize that this is going to be a hot topic, and I really want to see more ability of the public to be engaged in these meetings. I'm a very active and interested participant, and so being able to engage in these, I mean, I'm kind of engaging in it by attending these various meetings online, interbasin coordination. I'm hoping for more public outreach and more transparencies on some of the controversial issues that are inevitable as we move forward in the Sigma process. So thanks for taking my comment.
Thank you, Jim. I see there are other hands that are up. And so let me go to Mary and then Ann Jeanette, and then I'll see if any of the staff or consultants have any thoughts or in response. Mary?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back, change the subject a little bit, go back to what Christina and Byron were saying just about the benefits of this program. And we're super thankful for Butte County for organizing this, and for DWR for providing CBI's excellent leadership. You know, I think this whole effort is going to be hugely beneficial to all of the GSP development in the North Sac Valley. We have to, per Sigma, the GSPs across basin boundaries, they really have to line up technically. There can't be any big discrepancies. And I think if we were all kind of left to do it on our own, it wouldn't be this organized. And so I think this effort is hugely important. And by the time our GSPs get to DWR, when they're submitted and they're being reviewed, this is going to be a big part of DWR looking at these plans and looking at how well coordinated they all are. So I think this is one of the very most important efforts that's happening in our region as far as coordinating this GSP effort. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mary. And Ann Jeanette?
Yeah, I just was wondering, Jim was speaking to adjudication, and well, first of all, the Butte Subbasin is very healthy, and we've got excess water going into the streams because we can't fill up our basin. So I'm interested to think where he thinks an adjudication needs to happen. And as far as the interbasin coordination, I think it's been really transparent, and the meeting notes and stuff that they take are very thorough. And then we were talking about public engagement from a subbasin standpoint. And they have been extremely helpful to make sure that all the consultants, especially to Jim's point on interbasin flows, everybody's using the same numbers, so we aren't coming up with different numbers in different subbasins. And Christina or Byron can speak to that better than I can.
I would be curious to hear about that, because I know that we talked about that before, and there was a discrepancy in that very first report that went out, east to west flows. under the Sacramento River. And it was, and I did meet with you about that, Christine. I'm just curious if that has been solved.
So I think we have some of the numbers. It hasn't been solved yet. I guess that's the short answer. I think that we've realized, and Byron can weigh in on this too, that we probably need to break things out and to combine, Sac River flows and interbasin flow into one number may not meet the requirements of the law. But we are still looking to those regional models to inform the dynamics along that boundary because of the limitations of the Butte Basin groundwater model. So those models that are being used in our neighboring subbasins are still kind of works in progress. And so we're waiting to get kind of the final numbers and to make sure. I think one of the things that we learned at the December 1st meeting is that it's tricky to actually be able to compare numbers that come out of one model and the supposedly kind of similar number that comes out of the other model when you drill down to really identify and make sure that they are apples to apples takes a little bit more work. So that's kind of the iteration that we're in, is understanding some of the nuances of why consistency and kind of the first number that can pop out of the model with the first number that pops out from the other model, and what needs to be done differently to make sure that we're understanding, if those numbers aren't the same, which they won't be exactly the same for sure, but where are the differences coming from? And so that's kind of the stage that part of that process is in, as well as waiting for other modeling efforts that are just behind or, got started later and are working on their basin setting right now. Then I will note to the website, we're having some just technical difficulties with updating the Butte County website. So it's delayed, but that meeting summary and the model tab that Byron talked about that is available through the SHAC materials will get posted to that website, to that central website. It's just not there yet because of some website issues.
If I could add something, is that one of I think the biggest advantages of this program is just having everyone in the same, like the different staff in the same room, and kind of building those relationships and fostering those conversations, particularly as like GSP process develops, because many of the decisions won't like entirely be based on the modeling output, but there will be different considerations. So it's kind of making sure that those conversations are flowing, that people are connecting, and then there are the venues for staff to communicate to each other and share lessons and kind of get to know each other better as well. So like the relationship building part, I think is really helpful too.
Okay, thank you. We really look forward to a time in this process when the other basins that are started after Butte County will have their information available, and it can be presented to you in a more digestible format. I think Christina really spoke to exactly where we are in this process. At the December, I mean, we were maybe, Jim, I so appreciate you reading all of the materials and staying so abreast. I mean, you're so committed to this. And I think that when we had some initial conversations with the staff and consultants, we thought by December 1st that we would be able to have more of the information from all of the subbasins. But when we got to December 1st, we realized that some of those subbasins are not yet ready, right? And so all we can do is to continue the conversations, make that information as accessible as we possibly can. And right now, as Mariana mentioned, and Christina also spoke to, there are going to be smaller conversations happening between consultants and staff, neighbor to neighbor, to try to understand what's been underneath some of those outputs from the models. And then as soon as that picture and that story becomes more apparent and we know how to tell the story, there will be no hesitation in providing you with all of that information. Still trying to understand what the model is telling us and how to tell that story in a way that can be understood. I hope that's helpful. I thank you for your patience. There's no desire as a facilitator who has an ethical obligation to all of you. There is no desire to keep any of this information from anyone. The goal is to make it absolutely transparent. And we will do our best. And we appreciate you sort of asking the questions to make sure that that happens. Okay, any other thoughts on this before we transition to really starting to wrap it up tonight? Okay. I just want to move to the GSA updates. We don't need to go around to everyone. I just want us to share any information, any updates from GSAs that are particularly applicable to the BAB. I wanted to mention one thing in particular. There, of course, was an election in November and some representation in your various GSAs, and some of the GSAs may have changed. And so I just want to make sure that that you're able to share that information between and among BAB members and with the public. So if there are any of your GSAs that had a change in your BAB representation, if you could just share that information now, because then we're expecting that there will be some new faces once those new representatives are seated in January. So on that point in particular, what have been some changes in representation? Anyone in Biggs West Gridley Water District, do you expect to see any changes in your representation come January on the BAB?
None.
So Mike Farr will still be in that position?
As of today, that's the way it is, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And how about Butte County? Will there be some changes?
Yeah, we can expect some changes with Supervisor Lambert, who's the primary right now, retiring off of the board. So the Board of Supervisors will assign a primary and an alternate probably in January.
Okay, thank you for that. And how about Butte Water District? Do you anticipate any changes?
There will not be, no.
You got the same people?
Yes,
And
that's
how
correct.
about the city of Biggs?
No, we're going to be the same.
Good.
No changes.
We know that there are changes in the city of Gridley, but they're not here today. Does anyone have information about that?
Yeah, this is Mike Farr. City of Gridley just changed their council, had an election. So they haven't yet determined who will be their representative. But by next meeting, I'm sure they'll know that.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mike. Because you're on that city council now, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for keeping us informed. And so we can expect to see some new representation from the city of Gridley at the next meeting, right? Which will be in February at this point for the BAB. And how about Mary, any changes with the CGA's representation on the BAB?
No change.
Okay, great. We don't know about Glenn County unless somebody knows about Glenn. I think that both John Villegas and Lee McDaniel were retiring from the board, right?
Yeah, I think that's right, Tanya. Okay,
well, there will be a change there, and we'll check in with Lisa Hunter on that. And then how about RD 1004? Any change we can expect for BAB representation?
No changes for RD 1004.
Thank you. And then we'll need to check in with RD 2106. They don't have representation here today, so we will check in with them. And how about Richvale Irrigation District? Do you expect any changes to your BAB representation?
No changes.
Okay, thank you. And Western Canal, any changes?
We reorganized in January, but I don't anticipate that there'll be a change.
Okay, Thanks, Anjanette. Okay, so we do have, well, I'm glad we went through that because we will have some changes that we can expect with Butte County's representation, City of Gridley, as well as Glenn County. So thank you for providing that information. Really appreciate that. Any other GSA updates that are important for the BAB? Anyone? Does Butte County have any updates?
I think the only thing is we did get approval from DWR on facilitation support services, so we can expect to have that continue through the 2021 calendar year. So we're thankful to DWR for the support from Tanya and Mariana for this process in the Butte Subbasin.
Yes, thank you so much. So there will be consistency with your facilitation team. And if there are no other GSA updates, that's a good segue in our last couple minutes here to mention that we are only under contract through December. So we have yet to schedule your upcoming meetings. We would like to do that. Unless there's some reason to change our schedule, we like to just move forward with the fourth Thursday of the month. And you'll remember that there's an alternating schedule so the GSA managers would meet next in January, and then the next BAB meeting would be in February, and it would just sort of go like that and alternate like that. And generally they're from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. We moved this one just to try to make it accessible for members of the public who may need to work until 5 p.m. Is there any concern with maintaining our existing schedule that we've had for the past year? Speak now or you will receive calendar invitations. Okay, you will receive calendar invitations. Those will be forthcoming. And I think because we're short on time, I won't say anything else about the projects and management actions, except to say that at the upcoming meeting, the next BAB meeting, we will be coming back to the projects and management actions discussion, but just wanted to note that you'll notice that there's an online form for projects and management actions that we provided with your meeting materials. So this is an opportunity for any of the GSAs to use that form if you know of possible stakeholders who may have projects and management actions or ideas for projects and management actions to collect those. It's also available on the website, and then you can provide them to us and the GSA managers can discuss them, and then they would come to the Butte Advisory Board. So this is an opportunity to just get it out there, do some initial identification of projects and management actions, and we encourage you to use that form if you do have ideas or if you feel that others may. If you have some suggestions for future agenda items, do get in touch with either your facilitation team or your various GSAs. So BAB members, if you have ideas, you can speak to your staff members who can bring those ideas into the GSA managers meetings. And for members of the public, if you have any ideas, do certainly communicate with us. With the facilitation team on that. Okay, we did sort of talk about the online experience when we had the conversation about outreach and engagement. So hopefully we've covered that, but if you ever have any other thoughts about what we can be doing better, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We want to hear your suggestions. Any final comments or thoughts before we wrap it up tonight? Okay, hearing none, seeing no hands. Thank you for staying 2 minutes over and for having an evening meeting. And I guess we won't see you until the new year. So everyone take care and enjoy the holiday season. And we look forward to continuing to work with you in 2021. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Tanya. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Mariana.
Bye-bye.